Sino next? Tinkercad?
we're getting to 3D modeling with Tinkercad. By the way, my name is Sir John, and I will be teaching you this lesson. So, for our project, we are going to create a keychain with our little name on it. Or it doesn't have to necessarily be our name. It can also be our some other funny phrase that we want, or it could just be our nickname. And while we're trying to create this object, don't forget to print a 30-minute print during this whole lesson of ours. If you've already found it, go right ahead and print it. For now, I'll just guide you through some steps to working with Tinkercad. First things first, we want to open up Tinkercad.com. Just put the data for us over here. Go ahead and do this time. We'll open up here. This one. Tinkercad. will be met with this screen right here. Here. Go to this screen. Let's first discuss some parts and pieces of Tinkercad. So, first thing first is the work plane. So the work plane build plane itself. So whatever goes onto the work plane is what's going to be onto the build plane itself. So we need to make sure that our objects fit onto this work plane and that it's reasonably sized. So next up, from the work plane, we go to the views. So these entire buttons here, they essentially control how you perceive the workspace itself. So from the top, we have the view cube. This one's going to be important very much later. So I try to remember the name, view cube. So what the view cube does is, just first move back on here, and then I could place down an object. So I'm just putting this object down, but what the view cube is essentially, it allows you to change the views by simply either clicking on the view cube itself and dragging it around to change the view and angle of what you're looking at currently. Or you can click on certain areas to change the view into that sharp point right there. As you can see, you can just click on any of these buttons here to move on to any surface that I would like. Now you can also just simply do this by holding right click and then panning the screen around like so. So you don't necessarily need to use the view cube, but it certainly does help for when you want to go to a certain view while examining the object itself. That's what you can do with view cube. Remember that, the view cube. From the view cube, we have the home view. And what this does, basically, is that it sets from your current view, it sets you back to the original home view. And that basically sets you back to the original zoom point and just the original view altogether. Next, we have the fit all in view. So what that does is basically, if we're out of sight but we still have our object selected, we can simply click on fit view to selected, and we'll just instantly go to the object that we're currently selecting. And if we have multiple objects selected, like let's say here, we have one and you click on the one, we'll just be viewing that one. But if we want to make sure that we're selecting multiple, we'll want to make sure that we've selected multiple. So let me just select both of these at the same time, and if I look away and click fit view to selected again, or the fifth view, we go back to here and it basically keeps us zoomed out so that we see both objects at the same time. Next, we have the zoom in and zoom out button, and as the name suggests, it just lets us zoom in and out. But we can also use the scroll button as well, in case we want to zoom in closer or zoom out. But if we don't have the scroll button, what we can do, if we don't have the scroll, we can also just simply, touch the touchpad itself, and then either pinch to zoom out, or perform this motion. I forgot what this motion. No, this reverse. But yeah, you just basically expand your fingers in opposite directions and you will be zooming in instead. if I look at this object, you can clearly see it's three-dimensional. We can see the, you can see the object has, you know, a perspective. You can see the perspective of the object. And right now we're looking at the front of it. And if we click on the flat view, or this button right here, it will turn it into a 2D space instead, which means all of that perspective is gone. It's now just a flat surface that we can examine a lot more closely. And the reason why we want to use this button is so that we can be more accurate with, you know, adjusting the sizes of these objects, and so that it isn't too confusing when we're like dealing with multiple objects and the perspective is jumbling up our eyes just a little bit, even though we have these numbers to tell us what the sizes are. But yeah, this is actually going to be really helpful down the line in making sure an object is flat on the surface of our work plane, and also flat on the surface of another object. I'll explain later. So let's just go back to here and move on to the next slide. What we're going to do first is we're going to place down the red cube, much like I did earlier. So you can set that, you just need to click on the red cube right here and then click it anywhere you want. I just placed mine in the middle. Once we've placed down the red cube, we can go ahead to just rotate it around a little bit. We're super sure of what we're doing. You can go ahead and zoom in as well. Or you can also hold the middle mouse button to actually pan it around like this. Now once we've done that, we can go on ahead and zoom out. So first thing we're going to do is adjust the size of our object. We're going to adjust the height first. So let's select our object here. Don't change these properties down here. These are a lot more drastic. So what we want to do is we just want to click on the squares themselves. So here we want to select the square at the very top here. And once we've selected this square, we're going to change the value from 20 to 3. Now we can change the value by just clicking on the square here and then changing the number from here. Or you can just simply left click hold and drag it down instead. Like so. I'm just going to leave mine at 3. Next up, we're going to be increasing the height to 3. Next up, we're going to set the width from 20 to 50. To do that, we're going to click on this square right here in the middle, this black square. Now these just change one angle only. And you can also just drag it around as well, or you can just click on here to change the value. But what we want to do is to set to 50. Once we set it to 50, next up, we're going to place the work plane tool onto the surface of our name tag here. So the work plane tool is just right over here at the top right. Right underneath import, you just click on the work plane tool. You can drag it out and then just set it down onto the surface of our object right here. And what this does is basically it moves the work plane to the surface of the object we're trying to currently work with, like so. It makes putting objects on that surface a lot more easier for us. So now that we put down a work plane for our object, surface of our object. So to do that, we just scroll down from the basic shapes library here. We find text. We left click hold, drag it out, and place it onto the surface of our keychain right here. Now, as you can see, the text is quite large. It means we're going to have to we can first change the name. So to do that, we just click on the properties right here. Change it from text to whatever our name is, or we can change it to something else, like CoLab, for example. I'm just going to set mine to CoLab. Be sure it fits. Next up, we can just simply resize it using the corner squares here, so that it's a little bit more uniform in a way. We're going to set it down. We're going to change the height and size. First, we're going to change this overall size, the width and length of it. So I'm going to just set it down to maybe 40 and 10. Once I've set it down to 40 and 10, I'm going to change the angle a little bit, zoom in, and then change the height from 10 to 3. We're also setting that down all the way to 3. Next up, we're going to align the text and the keychain together. And to do that, we're going to have to select both of them at the same time. So to do that, we're going to create a window for this, and then select them both at the same time, like so. And then we're going to click on the Align tool right up here. This is the Align tool. As you can see, it arranges shapes by their sides, centers, tops, or bottoms. The dots control where it goes. These dots right here. So you just click on it and you'll see these dots. And the dots we want to click on are the middle dots right here, because we want to keep the name centered to our object. So we're just going to click on it, and as you can see like an outline, a hidden outline of where the object will go once you align them. You click on this one at the left or right, wherever you're positioning your camera, and then you click on the middle one down here. That will automatically align our object. Now don't press these buttons up here, because then it will move our object in different spots and places. Don't click on these ones here either, because what that's going to do is it's going to move it into different spots. It'll basically move the z-axis of this object right here. So we don't want to do that just yet. So click on the middle dots right here, and that should center our object right now. Next up, once we've aligned our object, we're going to want to push down our text by -1. Now, the reason why we want to push down our object to -1, I'll show you right now. So, as I mentioned earlier, with the flat view, it helps us determine whether or not an object is flat on the surface of an object. Because if it were, like, say, negative, like +1, or like floating, basically, like this, what's going to happen is the printer is going to detect that there's like floating regions right here. And sometimes the printer will just continue printing on even though it detects this issue. And you don't listen to its warning. And if we try to print it like this, where there's like a little gap in between the object and the other object right here, what's going to happen is it's going to spaghettify like this. And we want to avoid that ever happening at all costs. So that's why we want to make sure that our objects are like firmly set into the object that we're trying to create. Now we want to make sure we're setting it to -1. We don't want to put it anywhere lower. So just set it down to -1. If you still notice that there's a little gap, you can set it a little bit deeper as well. Remember, you need to make sure that it's completely all the way in, because even something like this, even something like this is still considered a gap, and it will cause the print to fail altogether. So we want to make sure that it is firmly in there. Yeah, sure. If you don't see any gaps, that should be fine. If you still want to, you merged it. Yeah, you're not supposed to merge it, at least not yet. So you just click on this button here. So you have them both selected right now, right? Yeah, you just need to select the one, and we just want to set it down by -1. Yeah, that should be fine. No. You need to set the height. Right? I mean, set the z-axis itself. So to do that, you just click on this cone right here, and that's how you basically set it down and up. That's fine. So you just click on it, then you set it down to -1, and that should be good. Our object should now be inside of itself. Next up, we're going to group these two objects together. Now remember to select both of them at the same time, and then you click on the Union Group button, not this bundle group button here. What this is going to do is it's going to just put the two objects, it's just going to group the objects together, but it won't merge them, essentially. Union Group, however, merges these two objects together, like so. And they're now considered an actual singular object. So now that we've grouped these two objects together and we've made sure that they are firmly in the plane itself, we can change the view again, set it back to 3D view so that we have a perspective of our object here. Next up, we're going to remove the work plane tool. And to do that, we're going to have to just simply click on the work plane tool here, or left click, hold, and drag it out. And instead of placing it on the object again, we're going to set it outside of the object. We're going to just release, and what that's going to do is it's just going to set it back down to the original work plane that we were working on earlier. So now that we've done that, the next thing we want to do is we're going to put down a keychain hole. But before we put down the keychain hole, I'm going to present you with a couple other versions of this keychain hole, which you've probably seen by now. So we have ring, we have torus, and then finally we have tube. Now I'm going to start discussing all of these holes right here, these keychain holes, and we're going to start off first with the ring. Now the ring may seem like a really good option for keychain ring. It's thin, it's very simple, it's not thick, and it can easily go on our object right here. But here's the issue. It's very thin, right? And that can actually be an issue for our printers, because if an object is way too thin, one of two things will happen. The printer will have difficulty actually detecting the size of this object altogether, even if we try to make it like really big or something like that. What that's doing is really it's just stretching it out. And we don't want it to be just stretched out, we actually want it to have some thickness to it, some weight. That way our printer can actually print it properly, and that way it's not too easily deformable or too easy to crush overall. Because like PLA, it can like snap off really easy, or it can just like break or warp very easily as well. And that's why we don't like using ring all too much. I'm just going to remove the ring. And then next up we have the torus. Now the torus, much like the ring, has a curved appearance, making it a really nice keychain ring for our keychain right here. But this thing also has a weakness of its own, and that's basically, that is, well, it's a bit curved. See, if we click on the orthographic view again, click on front, and then we zoom in on the object, as you can see right here, on the sides here, it's angled in a way. And for some instances, if a print has an angled area right here, there can be problems with trying to print it out. Because since it's being printed in this angle, there is a potential need for support. So what that's going to do is it's just going to end up making us take more time to print this object out, even though it should be really relatively easy to print out. And even though we've like set it down to 3, the angle just becomes much more obvious, and it can pose as an issue for our prints. It's a lot more safer to have an object that has like a flatter surface, because if you also look down here, you'll notice that this object doesn't have a really flat surface, right? If it doesn't have a really flat surface, it makes less contact with the plate, and if it doesn't have enough contact with the build plate, it can potentially, and that's the same issue with the ring, because these two objects don't have enough, contact with the build plate, it can just lead to total print failures, or they just in general bad prints. So why is it that we have 2 now? Moving on from the torus. The 2 is pretty much a very simple, very good object, because from down here you can see that it has very little to no curves at all, aside from the circular exterior. I mean, the circle outside here, you can see that it's, despite the fact that it's still curved, at least with the bottom, it has like a lot of contact area with our build plates here. And because it has a lot of contact area with our build plates, that makes it very good for overall printing. So we will be using this as our keychain ring. So we're going to just again set that from 10 to 3 so that it's in line with the height of our keychain here. Next up, I'm going to move the tube right next to my keychain. Now you can actually move it anywhere you want. You can move it right in the middle up here, right in the middle down here, to the sides, right over here and here. And that basically gives us the ability to place the keychain hole anywhere we want. So I'm going to like just keep it right here in the sides so that I can still see it very clearly. The next thing you can do here is to select both of them again, and to also click on the align tool once more, so to make sure the keychain hole itself is perfectly aligned with the keychain, as seen here. And we notice that the dots here are grayed out, meaning that this is now perfectly aligned with. This is now perfectly aligned with the rest of our print now. And since it's perfectly aligned with the rest of our print, we can go ahead and click on Union Group once more to group the keychain hole alongside the name itself. So now that we've aligned them and merged them, we've already already set the height of our tube. We've already merged them. The thing we're going to want to do is we're going to export it as an STL. So to do that, we're just going to go back here, and from right next to the import button, we click on the export button. Then once we've clicked on the export button, you go down here and click on .stl, and that will export our object as an STL file. You'll see our object is being downloaded up here. We can go ahead and click on it. I'm going to go ahead first and get it from here. So from here, this little ghost object, I'm going to click on the object right here, this little box. You can actually just simply click on the object from the file itself, and it should open up into Bamboo Labs, since you can see the icon right there. Now once you've clicked on the icon, or once you've opened it up in Bamboo Labs, I'm just going to open it up from here. You'll notice the names, Surprising Tuning Minor. I don't know what that means, but that's just basically Tinkercad randomly generating a name for us to look at and notice, because of its very outlandish combination of words and vowels. So once we've selected this object, it'll come out here. It'll be just sitting right there. And yeah, that is going to be it for this round. We'll be moving on to the next lesson. We'll be moving on to our next lesson. Before we do that, we're going to actually print out the keychain itself. But before that as well, I'm going to be asking you a very important question, all right? Now, I asked you to remember this little thing from earlier. What tool lets you switch between the top, front, side, and isometric views? Yes. The cube, yes, come on, we're very close. Very close. Alright, I'll give you guys a hint. Oh, yeah. There we go! Hey! Wow! You got it. Here you go. CoLab for you. So, now that we've gotten this question out of the way, we can get into 3D slicing using Bamboo Studio. But before we actually get into 3D slicing with Bamboo Studio, let's actually print out our keychain with our name on it. So, first things first, what we want to do is slice plate right away. But instead of going to print, we're going to pull up this. All you need to do is click on this arrow head, and it will bring it up. And then we'll be able to see our object. Now once we have the ability to see our object, the next thing we want to do is we're going to change this little bar up here, this little green bar. Now you just click on the plus sign up here, and then you drag it all the way down until you see the beginning print of your name right here. Now, if it's anywhere here, you want don't try to go anywhere lower than when you see your name. If you see it like this or this, that means you've gone too far. You want to just stop right around here, but you can also just stop right up in these levels in here. But if you can, try to set it all the way down to 16. If 16 looks wrong, then just go bring it up to 17 or 18. And then it will just basically show our name. Now once we've dragged down the green bar to this level, or to this layer actually, because what this thing is it's basically showing us the slices of our object. So I want you guys to go down to maybe the 16th slice to the 18th slice here. And then once you are on that slice, I want you guys to go ahead and right click onto the green bar, the plus sign itself, and then add a pause on that layer. And what that's going to do is basically going to pause during the printing process, which will give us the opportunity to swap out the filament color for our prints. And if you look in your drawers again, you'll notice that there is a white strand of filament for you to use, and that will basically act as the highlight for your print. So, oh, by the way, in case you don't have a mouse available to you, what you can instead do is just simply look at your touchpad, bring up at least 2 fingers, and then double tap while hovering over the green bar, and that should allow us to right click it, essentially, and then we can add the pause layer through that method if we don't have a mouse available to us. So now that we've done all of this, we just need to slice click again because we've interrupted the process. And what the object should look like, or what the pause layer should look like, is like this. We want only our name to be highlighted, because if it's gone, it highlights this entire area. The area is white. That means we've paused too far, and we should go back up and pause it around this level, or this layer. Now that we've completed all of this, I'll wait for you guys to go ahead and print the plate, and then send it out onto your printers. Once we've reached the pause point during the 3D slicing, we can go ahead and swap our filaments so that we have a multicolored print, essentially. Alright, so we have our objects being picked up on to our first slide. And what we have right here is just a quick preview of our design user. So on the left here, we have the printer panel. So as you can see here, the selected printer is the current printer we're going to be using. It will show up as different plate using the printer itself. So we want to make sure that we're always using the correct printer for the object we're trying to print. Otherwise, it won't send the proper information to the printers we're currently connected to. So we want to make sure that we're using the correct selected printer at all times whenever we want to print out an object. On the next one is the plate type. This basically, there's more than one plate really. Right now we are using the textured plate and we want to keep it that way. But in the future, if you want to use different types of plates, this is where you change it and try to use whatever other plate that you may have at the time. Down the filament profile, this is where we choose the profile for certain filaments. Right now, this one is set to Sunroof ABS. But if you go back here, preview, you'll see that we can just change it to whatever filament that we're going to be working with or we intend on working with. Make sure that the filament profile matches best with what is currently loaded in with our printers over here or in your A1 minis. If it's not set to the correct one, it can potentially cause some issues, but so long as it's PLA on PLA, PETG on PETG, and so on, it should be fine, generally speaking. Next up, we have the slicer setting presets here. These are the ready-made presets for the commonly used slicer setting. It's so that we don't have to change too much of the slicer settings down here ourselves. We just use the preset settings available to us right up here. And down here we have the slicer settings all together. Don't worry, I'll explain more about these three specific ones, because these ones are going to be the ones we'll be interacting with the most, which is quality, strength, and then support. Now, next we have the model panel, or the model tab right up here. And here we can interact with the 3D model itself using these tools. The Add 3D model lets us add the model from our file system right up here. The Add Plate basically allows us to add an additional plate in case we have multiple printers or in case we want to set up a print-by-print process. We start with the first print, and then the second print, and then the third print. If it's like multiple types of objects that we're trying to print. Next we have the Auto Orient tool. The Auto Orient tool basically orients our objects or rotates it to the most optimal position, its widest surface or its most cheapest surface when printed. Next up, we have the Auto Arrange, and that automatically arranges all of the objects, not just like one specific area, all of the objects throughout our prints, and it can also create additional plates in case there are too many. Then we have the adaptive layers. What the adaptive layers does is basically makes our objects come out much more smoother. Let me show you what that eventually looks that there's at least 1 or 2 steps here, but I can actually make that a lot more smoother by setting the quality down to 0.010, set the radius up all the way to the max, 10, get on adaptive, very smooth, and once I select it again, you'll notice that it is much more smoother than before. This is perfect for when you're wanting to make an object that has like a lot of curved areas, and when you print that object out, it's going to have like these steps to the object, right? So what this tool does, it basically makes that object look a lot more smoother than what it originally looked like. So it's a really useful tool if you want to make that object come out looking much more nicer. Then we have the move tool, which, as the name suggests, it just helps us. It just allows us to move the object around the plate. We have the rotate tool. The rotate tool allows us to make the object ourselves to angles that we potentially use. We can better explain that later in the TNM session. Next up, we have the scale /different. Oh, good. So, for some of you, that are currently paused, what you want to do first is go to the touch screen right here. I'll just use this printer over here as an example. You click on Control instead of the filament. You just go back all the way, and then you click on Control. And once you click on Control, you'll see nozzle right here. You click on the nozzle, and you set that to 250. Once you set that to 250 and press OK, you just need to wait for your print to go up all the way to 250 or close enough to that. And once the object has reached that level of heat, what we want to do next is we're going to want to press this little lever right here. And this lever is basically the cutting tool for the tool heads right here. Whenever you put it here, it will automatically cut off the filament itself. But for this case, because there's currently an issue whenever we pause our prints and then try to unload it automatically, it has some issues. So that's why we're doing this little manual unloading practice. Loading and unloading practice. So, as I was saying, just once it reaches 250, 250 on the nozzle. That's it. You press the button up here. You extrude upward. You don't need to keep pressing it all the way because it's already pushed itself out. So now you can just go ahead and unspool it from the Teflon tube. That way it's much more smoother. Yeah. And then go ahead and we'll insert the white foot into the Teflon tube. Yeah, now it's the extrude or like first cut and then extrude. Now you can press up again. Yeah, press up. And you can also like push this along as well. While you press the extrude upwards. Go ahead, press it again. Yeah, you can go ahead and try it yourself. So that way it's smooth. Once you feel it, or once you see it no longer connect, you can keep pulling it out and then try to load it in. Ooh! Yeah, we can just pause it here. And then we can just like
nozzle, di ba? So, extrude downwards naman tayo. Make sure na hinihila siya when you're extruding downwards. So, click it one at a time. Sige, bitawan niya yan. And then feel this part. Pakiramdaman niyo kung nahihila ba siya. So, one at a time na. So, feel it getting cold. When it's not getting cold, you need to push it upwards naman. Yun, first. Yes, sige.
And once you've changed your filament, you can go ahead and press
Then getting cold,
the
we feel
pause
it.
button and continue. Printing out the object.
Sige, first. Nahihila na siya. So now, you have to watch this. Ay, pag naman nahihila na siya, panoorin niyo to. Make sure na mapalabas niyo na yung white filament. Pag lumabas yung white filament, you have to fix up. And then that also means na nakaload na siya.
So it's
Say na up. Okay, it's loaded in. I'm good to go. Okay, start. Extrude ay already loaded in. Ang pwede nyo namang gawin yan. Load out. And then just resume your actually resume problem solving. Yeah.
oh no, there should be a strand of white filament on the best thing. It's no longer a keychain, that's just a name tag. It's not even a name tag, it's a name plate.
Okay.
Yep. Now once you've done that, you pull when you see it extrude from down here. resize. This tool up here basically lets us change the size of our objects. Makes it either smaller or bigger. Next we have the lay on face button. And what that button does is basically, as you can see with these little lines here, these little highlights here, these basically put our object on a flat surface, or the flat surface it can find or detect from the object itself, and wherever we press it, it moves to that new spot. Where it moves that face onto the build plate itself. Next we have the cut. Don't worry, I'm going to actually explain more about this particular tool later on. What you need to know is it just allows us to cut an object into pieces. Next we have the combine / boolean, and what that does, it's basically like the union group in Tinkercad. It merges 2 or 3 objects together. Then we have the assembly. That's it helps us assemble an object together if it comes in pieces. Then we have the tolerance / paint. I'll also be explaining this alongside cut. And what you need to know is that it allows us to paint our objects using filament itself. I'm over here. Then we have the text tool. That allows us to put text onto an object or right next to an object. And then we have paint support, which basically lets us paint like manual support for support over here. I'll try to explain that later on. So, now that we've discussed the UI for bamboo slicing, we can get right into the basics of slicing with Bamboo Studio. This is just another overview of what we'll be discussing. What we're going to first discuss is print quality settings, basically the quality of our prints, or how we can change it or affect it. Then we have the strength settings, which basically controls the overall durability and strength of our prints here, whether we can make it stronger or weaker. So both of these basically can determine how fast we can print our objects or how slow they'll be printed. Then we have adding support, a very important topic regarding making sure our objects come out perfectly and in one piece. Then we have coloring of your print. Now this will basically involve discussion with the AMS a little bit, but it will also help us visualize what we want our object to look like. Then we have cutting our prints into parts, which means we're basically sectioning our print into different parts and pieces, and how that's very helpful for us when it comes to printing them out. So, first things first is print quality. What affects the quality of our prints? So, there are 2 things. We have nozzle size and the slicer presets themselves. So, the nozzle size affects the overall quality of our prints. Now, each nozzle has a certain amount, a certain size it can go to. For example, if we use something like 0.4, which is the standard nozzle that we're currently using as well, for 0.4, it can only go as low as 0.08 millimeters in layer height. Now the layer height itself is basically the ley lines you see on a print. For example, this little object here, right? If you look at it, you'll notice the ley lines right there, but this is just a sphere, so details aren't really that well known for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another plate, and we're going to add another object here. We're going to use bench for that. So if we click on slice plate right now and use the standard 0.20, this is the standard, by the way, the standard slicer preset. for the 0.4 nozzle up here. And as you can see, it has a lot of lines. You can actually see it well enough just from here alone. And for some of your prints that come out, it can be quite obvious with the ley lines altogether if we just print it as it is. And 0.20 does have like a pretty obvious ley line as you look at it right now. But let's say we set the slicer setting right here from 0.20 all the way down to 0.08, which is extra fine. And we try to slice that right now. As you notice, it's a little bit longer, but as you can see here, the ley lines aren't as visible. I mean, you can still sort of see them, right? But you can notice how much more smaller they are, and how much more smoother the print becomes. As you can see, this print, it's a lot more smoother. It will come out a lot more nicer looking, but it will take a lot of time to print out because of the smaller ley lines, because it's taking more time to print those smaller ley lines, adding more layers for each of that now. And those 0.08 layers are just going to stack up until we end up with this fine looking print. So that's what nozzle size affects. It affects the overall quality of our prints. And 0.0 and 0.4 is like a standard, but we can go higher or lower. In this case, we can go lower and use a 0.2 nozzle to just generally use like lower layer heights. As you can see here with the screen, the current nozzle is set to 0.2, and as you can see, the standard for it is actually 0.10 or 0.1. And that is as low, and that's just like the standard. But we can still go higher or lower. And the lowest it can currently go is 0.06, which is the lowest layer height at the moment in the market. But with that layer height, it already comes out very nicely, but 0.2 in general just makes like much more very well detailed prints. So if you're like trying to make little nice art sculptures or pieces, it's actually a pretty good idea to use a 0.2 nozzle to create these really nice and fine detailed objects just from the get-go, instead of like having to use the 0.4 nozzle. But the 0.4 nozzle is still a pretty great nozzle to use altogether for like a general purpose. But if you really want to use specified nozzles, like say a bigger nozzle, so that you can have faster prints come out, then yeah, you can use that nozzle instead for those types of prints. As for the slicer settings, as I mentioned earlier, each nozzle basically has its own presets. And each of these presets can range from fast prototype settings to slower, more finer detailed prints altogether. But you can also actually like manually change the layer height settings right over here. You can set it as low as 0.6, 0.06, or 0.08. But you can only go as low as the numbers seen on here on the recommended. You can't really go anywhere lower than those numbers right here. Now, an important thing to remember when it comes to layer height, the lower layer height means finer print quality, right? But the higher layer height, no. But it will also take a lot more time to print because it's basically taking more time to print out each layer as it goes on. Next, the higher layer height means less print quality. It'll look a lot more ugly, so to speak, but it'll come out much faster, and it's actually quite perfect for prototype prints or like objects that you don't depend on having last long. We just want them to come out right away. So yeah, this is that's how you can use the print quality to determine if you want a really good looking object, but it will of course take time. And if you want a very, fast object, but you don't need it to have really good quality, you can just set it to something like, say, 0.28, so that it comes out really fast, or faster than normal. Let's actually see what that looks like. Extra draft. You slice the plate here. As you can see, the ley lines are a lot more visible, and it's a bit more uglier to look at, but it's now taking like just 41 minutes to print out, and that should actually be quite fast for a print of this size and complex design. Now, moving on from print quality, we can get on to strength. So, what is strength? Well, strength is what affects the durability of our prints altogether. So, there are two things that affect that durability. There is wall loops, and then there is sparse infill. So, right now we're going to focus on wall loops. What are wall loops? They're basically loops of filament around the object itself. They're the exterior layer of the object. And as you can see, this is how many there are. Currently, there's 2 wall loops for this 3D print sheet right here. And as you can see, it is just 2 wall loops going around all together. And this can affect how strong our prints can be. So wall loops themselves help thicken our objects, and depending on how many wall loops there are, it can really help in the impactors in giving our object a lot of impact resistance. Meaning it will handle, getting dropped or thrown every now and again, or just experiencing a general amount of, punishment, right? It can handle maybe a hit or two, maybe it can handle like a lot of hits altogether. Oh, by the way, I've noticed that since most of you are finished printing, you can actually still continue on with printing out more objects throughout the lesson. We're not like tied down to whatever's on the screen. You guys can still go on ahead and keep printing with your filaments right now. Just be sure to try and load them in. Yeah, I'll wait. Yeah, so what you're going to want to do is, you just need to, well, in this case, actually, since we don't have a paused print, you can just automatically unload it. Yeah, you just go to the filaments, press back again, and then click on filaments, and then just press unload. And because we don't have a paused print right now, we can just use that method instead. Anyway, as I was saying, when it comes to wall loops, so the more wall loops we have, it helps thicken our print and gives our prints like really good impact resistance altogether. Now, generally speaking, 2 wall loops is more than enough, but you can actually increase that amount of wall loops from 2 to, let's say, 4. And 4 wall loops will really help thicken our prints and make it really a lot more durable now. But there is cost. It will take a little bit more time in the printing process just to create that because it's adding more layers into our prints here. But in doing so, it makes our objects a lot more sturdier, and it gives us the opportunity to sand it down. And the reason why we want to sand it down is to actually further remove the ley lines that appear on our prints. And it's not like a really good idea to sand it down with maybe 1 or 2 wall loops, because if you sand it down with just at minimum 1 wall loop, what's going to happen there is it's just going to basically punch a hole into our print. So we want to have at least maybe 1 or 2 wall loops before printing out our object and sanding it down. But if you're curious as to what an object would look like with, no wall loops or layers, I mean, you can actually look at these little prints right here. These were printed without wall loops and top and bottom shells. You can go ahead and pass those around. Let me see if I have another one here. I guess it's just those two right now. But as you can see, those are what an object will look like without those, you know, walls or shells. And going back from here, or going back to focus on the wall loops again, you'll probably notice that over here at this print, there's more than 2 wall loops. It actually looks like there's 5 wall loops even. But in reality, it's not actually 5 wall loops. It's just it's just the walls getting closer and closer in proximity to one another. And because they're getting closer and closer, but there's still a little bit of gap to be filled, that gap is filled up by the sparse infill. And what the sparse infill is basically the literal internals of our prints here, as you can see with this grid pattern infill. So what the sparse infill does overall is it helps give our objects very good structural integrity, and what else it can do is it also helps further the strength of our prints by giving it more impact resistance, or basically better absorption of energy, right? As you can see right here with the grid pattern, not only does this pattern really help in all of the patterns really help in absorbing impact, but the amount of density there can be for the object can determine how internally strong the object itself is, and how much punishment it can take. We can set this as low as from 15% all the way down to 5%, and you can actually go as high as 95%. Now, the reason why I mentioned these numbers, with 5% going as low as it does, is because an object is going to need a little bit of infill so that the filament has the ability to stand in a certain area, a spot, and it can be supported by basically itself. If you don't have any infill for your object, it becomes basically hollow, and that can be pretty bad. And in reverse of this, if we set it all the way to actually 100, you can just straight up fill an object. That might sound good, but in actuality, you've just made your object a lot more weaker and more difficult to print. Well, not really difficult, but it's easier to print now because now it's just one big layer altogether. But because of that, it's now a solid piece. And because it's a solid piece, it's not going to be able to absorb that impact more effectively. In fact, it's going to make it more prone to shattering on impact. Because much like a rock, which can be very dense, it is just as much brittle because it doesn't have the ability to absorb that impact properly. And because it can't absorb that impact properly, it is more likely to break apart into smaller pieces. And we really don't want that for our prints. We want them to have at least a little bit of air inside, so it's capable of absorbing those impacts altogether and being more squishy in a way. But yeah, that is strength overall. This is that's just generally how you want your prints. Remember, we recommend going only as high as 95% or lower, and we can only go as low as 5%. And this is also that we can either save a filament or make whatever pattern you want. We personally have found that gyroid is overall a really good pattern for speeding up the printing process. Let's say with grid, it's it's already a pretty great standard pattern, but there is a small, con, right? It has these micropauses. And now a micropause is like what? Really small pause. It's barely noticeable. But like, those micropauses slowly stack up over time. And within those micropauses, even though it takes like what? A literal like second or two, like just literally like a microsecond, they stack up because there's more points to stop at. There's more points to stop at, and each time it stops at those points, they start to count upwards. And eventually you start ending up from a microsecond to an actual second to straight up a few minutes or more. And that's what the weakness grid has. Or it does have like a really strong base, but those microseconds can stack up and create a lot more time for your print to take. And we found that gyroid fixes that issue a little bit by, instead of having those microseconds or those micropauses, what it does is it paints it goes more in a flow state, like a back and forth, like a painter's brush, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and going sideways, 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 sideways. And it's basically just like that. It's smoother, and there's a lot less micro pauses there because it's going at a smooth printing rate. And we found that gyroid overall still has that really good absorption, much like with grid overall. But again, it's up to you to find out which is your preference when it comes to printing out an object. Maybe you want to use a honeycomb, or maybe you want to use lines, or whatever these ones do. We haven't personally tried them out ourselves, but it's up to you to, experiment when it comes to printing out these pieces. Now, moving on from strength, I'm going to talk about, just grab some pieces here. I'm going to talk about support. Now, some of you have already printed out objects that have support, but to further explain what support is, I first need to talk about what an overhang is. So, what is an overhang? So, as our FDM printers here start from the very bottom to the top, eventually it will create objects that have angles or areas that are slowly affected by gravity. So to better understand what that looks like or how that works is I'm going to use these two pieces of printed objects as an example. So let's start off first with this. Let's say we're building a tower, right? And our tower looks something like this. By the way, a thing to quickly note when it comes to 3D printing, this is considered a 90-degree angle because it starts from here to here. So this is considered a 90-degree angle. So right now this is a 90-degree angle, and basically if you try to print it this way, it is going to be fine. In fact, it's going to be perfect because the object is fully capable of supporting itself as it prints. Now, let's actually add an angle to the top of this tower. Let's say we add a small 90-degree angle, I'm going to say something. I'm going to say this is a small 70-degree angle now. This part here is now at a small 70-degree angle, and if we print it, it's going to still be fine actually. Gravity doesn't affect it all too much. It is still basically supporting itself, creating this nice tilted tower in a way. But now let's increase that angle, or in this case, let's decrease that angle from 70 degrees all the way down to, say, 45 degrees. Let's really make that angle a lot more serious. So if we set it down to like a 45-degree angle, now our print actually starts to experience gravity. And as you know, since the filament is still very hot and just fresh out from the nozzle, as it's printing at this layer now, what's going to happen is gravity starts to affect it just a tiny bit, where it's at areas that it's not completely supported. And what's going to happen is there's going to be like a little bit of bridging or noodling, right? And those little noodles will just like start to hang around all over to the area that is mostly affected by the gravity. And it will make the print a little bit more uglier, but it won't completely ruin it. It will make it uglier, and it might damage some certain areas. Let's see, like parts like here. Go ahead and pass them around as well. But let's say we set it down to something like 30 degrees. Now at 30 degrees, that is when gravity really starts to affect the print. And at that point, that is going to cause more potential print failures. It's going to make more noodles, it's going to make more strings, and that could potentially affect the print altogether. There's going to be less supports for itself, and it's going to just altogether end up with a lot of droops. But now let's actually make that angle from a 30-degree to a just straight up. What you consider this like a disconnected area. Let's say we print an object that has this type of angle, and by this type of angle, I mean this type of position where the object isn't connected to itself just yet. And if we try to print it this way without any support, like this, what's going to happen is it's going to end up like this thing right here. This is going to end up like a complete and total spaghettification because it has no support for the area we are trying to, add support for. And and once this area is met, what's going to happen is everything from this point on is going to, end up like a big ugly mess right over here. And that is where support comes in handy. Support basically creates this system or like these extra objects that will help our prints out when trying to print them. And here's what some of those supports will look like. There are two types of supports, and that will actually lead us to our next slide. We have the tree support, and then we have normal support. Now, tree support looks like an organic set of trees. And normal support is basically one big scaffold system. You can go ahead and pass this around. You can better get a better look at it. And as you notice, some of you have already handled tree support, and you've noticed that tree support is quite flimsy in a way, and that's on purpose. With normal support, it's a lot more difficult to remove, but that's what makes it really good as a support system. It gives really good stability for your prints altogether. But its weakness is that it covers an entire area, regardless of the angle it's at. Let me actually show you what that might look like. Let's say this boat right here. Benchy was actually perfectly capable of being printed without the need for any type of support. And if we try to use tree support for Benchy, we'll just get like a small amount of tree support, as seen here. But if we try to use normal support for Benchy, we get like this big mess of support altogether. And while this may seem bad, it's actually really now sturdy for the object being printed, because now all of those angles are completely covered, and it's more scaffold of supports, which can also be a bit difficult to remove as well. And that's what the weakness of, you know, normal support is. But its strength is that it really, really provides firm and good support for, like, say, structurally flat objects, like something like this, these battery covers that we printed for our cars. You can go ahead and look at this and pass it around. We printed from this spot here, but because there was nothing down here, we had to, like, add support for that spot. Now we could have just like printed at the top side, but we wanted to create like an example for it. But yeah, that is what normal support is, and you have now seen what tree support is, essentially. Now we can go on to the next part, which is support options themselves. Now, I have mentioned angle earlier, and I have mentioned 45 degrees and 30 degrees. I mentioned the 30 degree and 45 degree is basically with threshold angle, it applies support underneath the number itself, or underneath the angle. Like let's say for here, threshold angle is 30 degrees. What's going to happen is it's going to apply support from 30 under. Now, at 30 degrees, it's already perfect because, that's where support is very likely to be needed and where it's very likely that an object might have a lot of overhangs and droops because of that. And that's why we don't really recommend going anywhere lower than 30 degrees, because if you go anywhere lower than 30 degrees, you might end up with a potential ruined print. Now, there are some cases where an object is basically capable of supporting itself, like say an arch, right up here. This is considered an arch. It's basically supporting itself, so it won't really need support at all. So you can actually set that lower than 30 degrees, maybe like 50 degrees. But that's only if an object is fully capable of supporting itself and, not end up drooping down from gravity. And as the highest we recommend going with threshold angle is 45 degrees. And the reason why we recommend 45 degrees at maximum is because at that point, if you go anywhere higher than 45 degrees, it's becoming unnecessary. You're more likely to waste filament because the object is already fully capable of supporting itself. So we really don't recommend going anywhere higher than 45 degrees. Unless you really want your object to like come out, perfect. But you also have to end up cleaning out your object of whatever support system you're using. And tree support, although is easy to remove, it can still be a bit of a hassle to take off from time to time because like there can be so many, and at some point it actually gets a little tougher to remove than normal support itself. And normal support just covers the entire object, regardless of the threshold angle we try to set it on. Now moving on from threshold angle, we have the on-build plate only. Now, as the name suggests, it just creates support for the build plate itself, from the build plate, instead of like creating support within the object, because at some point the object will need to print with internal support from the outside, not like infill, but like from the outside of the object itself, because there are certain areas where the printer just simply can't reach using the build plate, so that's why it starts to create support from inside. Now, if you don't want to handle the cleanup process for that, you can of course turn on build plate only, which will keep all of the support on the build plate only. But you do come at the risk of basically creating overhangs on the object in spaces and areas you are very unlikely to see. Now this is mostly going to affect artistic objects like figurines or like really complex dioramas of certain objects or certain places. And that's why you're going to want to just ignore the on-build plate only, because otherwise you might end up with a lot of groups for those types of objects. But it's up to you as to whether or not you want to turn on, or whether or not you want to turn on build plate only. And then we have critical region zone. And as the name suggests, it just focuses on the critical areas of the object itself. But this admittedly only affects tree support, because normal support doesn't actually have this option. It's just going to, again, make support regardless of the angle, because with normal support, it detects the entire, anything that's that's like below 90 degrees. It just considers that like an overhead. So with critical regions, this is actually really perfect for saving up on filament, because sometimes supports can take like a lot of filament to use just to print out a very stable object. And that's why turning this option on is really great, so that you can avoid wasting too much filament altogether. And as I mentioned before, I did say that I would show you how this option support engines work. So in case you don't trust the support system itself, or the automatic support system, because whenever you use the auto versions of it, it will just automatically apply support at areas it detects. It detects as having overhang. But if you use the manual option and then click on the support painting, you'll be met with this tool type here, and then you can go ahead and use any of these options from circle, sphere, and fill, and then you can just simply paint the support for the areas you think are going to need that support. I'm just going to paint it all on these spots right here, because I think these things actually need the support. And then I'm just going to paint an entire spot for this area as well. Okay, just for that spot. And then if I slice the plate, it will create or generate support for the areas that I've deemed as having, overhang. And as you can see right there, it creates a little bit more trees just for these specific areas. Now you can also use this in combination with the tree auto system, actually. So it will still generate like the original tree system, but it will also create support for the, painted areas that you made for that object, as you can see there. But of course, it will create support within the object, because I did paint the entire upper portion of the roof as needing support. So yeah, it tries to generate all the support systems that you've painted, and that is the purpose of support painting. In case you don't trust the system, or you think it could use more support, you can use this option to, create more support for your object so that it's more stable and it comes out much more clear. So yeah, that is support. Now I can get right into coloring and cutting. So, coloring first. So, coloring your 3D objects. Now, this is to sometimes help you visualize what you want your object to look like. It's not always to create multicolored prints. Sometimes it's just to help you imagine what you want your object to just, come out as. Let me try and create one. For example, let me just include this object here. Add back our CoLab going to just paint it, right? Oh yeah, now I see why it's like this. Because we don't have a color there. We'll actually add a color. But I've noticed that we're only down with one color. So we're going to add a few more colors. We're going to press the plus sign here or over here. And the colors we use is actually the filaments. So if we add more colors right here, we'll end up with more colors. But let's change the color right here. Yeah, we're gonna make it orange. Yeah, yeah, we're gonna make this. And now we can go ahead and add some more personality to our CoLab. I'm gonna add some dots on here, over here, so that it has, so they just come out as like Spanish letters maybe. I can use this tool over here called Sphere, and just add it to surface of C, better see it. As the name suggests, Sphere is basically like a 3D version of circle itself. It just basically covers corners that you can't normally see if you don't move your camera a little bit. As you can see here, it captures the corners that I've missed. Then we can use triangle, and triangle is a little bit unique because instead of painting like with fill or focuses on a certain point like circle or sphere, it paints the entire polygon of the print itself. And that allows us to create like really unique shapes and styles for our prints. Then we have the height range, and height range is unique because it basically paints an entire layer height instead of just like a certain area. So I can just paint this entire spot. Just a little bit over there. Break a scoop in so that I just a little bit of this spot. And with fill, I can just focus on painting connected areas solely. Like so. Or with edge detection, I can just paint certain parts like this A as blue, or this spot as blue, and this spot over here is blue. And then I can do the same for this orange, for this O, but I will just replace the side with the yellow. I'll give this orange, bit more yellow, but also a little bit outer shell orange. Just for the sake of making it look really, really grand, right? And so we end up with this very unique looking object with multiple colors, and all together it looks really nice, right? Now I could just like paint this IRL and just make it look something like this as a representation, or I can actually try to use the AMS that I have, because I do have 4 colors, and I can color all of them using these 4 colors right here. And if I go ahead and slice the plate, it will look really nice. But you'll notice something. If I zoom out, you'll notice that there is this little thing right up at the top. And this little thing here is called a prime tower. I'm going to explain a little bit more into that later, but I'm just going to further just look at this object here. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, this thing is going to take a really long time to print. Why? Because there's just so many colors there. Now originally, this would have taken about maybe 15 minutes or 14, like 15, 18 minutes, but because of the amount of colors we added and the places we put them on, it complicates the printing time and the printing process altogether, because as we mentioned before, with Miss Chop, she mentioned that it will create like a lot of waste, it will take a lot of time to print, and because there's just a lot of systems to go through because basically it needs to swap out the colors, right? And every time it's swapping out the colors, it needs to calibrate each of those colors or filaments and make sure it's still, printing or heating it the right way. So it will have to go through a lot of flow dynamics, it will have to go through purges altogether. And with the added need for that whole system, it will create this thing over here called a prime tower. Now, if you're wondering what a prime tower is, what the prime tower is basically like a water cup, a cup of water. Now, imagine you're painting with watercolors, right? And if you treat the nozzle as like a painting brush for those watercolors, and you like constantly swap out like color after color, you'll notice that there's still some residue from the earlier color you used, right? So to avoid that unintended mixture of colors, you're going to want to purge those colors. So that's what the water cup is for. And that is what the prime tower is. It's basically like a purge cup. It removes any leftover filaments while acting as a system for the object, for the extruder to go through so that it smoothens out the rest of the print. Because every time it prints, it's going to replace those colors, and because the nozzle is still hot, there's still like a little bit of filament left over, and it can sometimes throw off the system. So that's why it's constantly recalibrating every time it swaps those colors. And that adds on onto the printing process because it's trying to smoothen out that process. And without a prime tower, by the way, that's not a good idea. If you're trying to print an object without a prime tower, Ron, go grab one of the pictures. So, after... So, as you can see here with these minions, you'll notice that they have multiple color tones, right? They have blue, they have yellow, they have white. That's already like 3 colors. So that's a lot of colors. So it probably took a long time to print. Yes, it did take a long time to print. And, well, the reason why it also took so long was because we printed an entire plate of them. Right? We printed multiple sets. We printed like the tall one, the one-eyed one, and this little guy right here. And we filled them onto the plate itself. Now, when we did that, we noticed this prime tower up here. Right? We noticed this prime tower here. And at the time, we didn't know what it was really for, so we removed it. But because we removed it, what happened next was, one of the minions became the prime tower. And if you're wondering what the prime tower minion looks like, unfortunately, we don't know. We kind of banished it from somewhere. I think we lost it, obviously, but yeah. Probably. But yeah, that's what happened to one of his minions, and that's why this one in particular, or this version in particular, is so traumatized. It witnessed what happens when you leave out a prime tower for multiple objects. Basically, one of the minions will become, or one of the objects will become the prime tower. So it's always necessary to have a prime tower ready so that when you're printing out an object, it comes out smooth and perfect, and not like an amalgamation of different colors. So that is why you want a prime tower, and that is why overall coloring is a very, very lengthy process when it comes to multicolored prints. But the strength of multicolored prints is you end up with really nice looking objects at the very least. And as you can see with the minions, even though it does even though it did take I think about 3 days, maybe a week, just to print this out, they came out really nice.
Because there's a lot of work.
Yeah, that too. But they do come out very nicely at the time. So yeah, that is the strength of multicolored prints, because with painting, it can look a little we add another object here, right? Let's say we add bench. But let's make it really big. 100 to 500%, and we'll have something like this. Now, why would we need like a really big bench? Very simple. Because we just want a really big bench. And as you pass this around, you'll notice, yeah, this is a pretty big bench sheet. And this was all printed in like this small plane. Even though it very much looks like it does not, it can't really fit it. So, how we managed to do this is very simple. We cut up this bench sheet into small parts. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the cutting tool right here, and this is what we will be met. And this is what we will be met with. This is the cutting plane, and this over here is the cutting settings. And we can change up the cutting plane using these numbers here. Now, of course, it's very simple, very rudimentary. It's just going to cut at a certain angle, and that's about it. Now we can still like customize the angles itself, but again, it's very rudimentary and very simple. Now, of course, I could go ahead and cut it just this way, but if I do that, I'm going to have to use one of two methods, a couple of methods, just to reattach the roof to the body. Now, I could go ahead and just use the roof and connect it via hot glue, super glue, or maybe even use a welding method, where I use a 3D pen to actually like connect both the roof to the body. Because 3D pens are actually using filaments as well. And if I use the correct type of filament, PLA on PLA, it will actually begin to merge with the parts, and it'll help stick the object together much more effectively when compared to, say, like super glue or hot glue. Now there's also a fourth method where we just basically heat gun the objects together, and then just try to mold them together through that method. But all of these methods are very ugly in a way, because they get just super messy, and just trying to clean up the process alone can get a bit tedious or just like ineffective. With hot glue, it's just like an external part and can sometimes not even mesh well. With super glue, it can vary in quality and can actually make the print look a little bit more uglier because of those white areas of super glue. Then we have the welding method with the 3D pen, and that method, although is a lot more effective than the first two, the cleanup process for that is also very tedious because you're still creating like big lumps of welds, just like how you would see on actual welded objects together. There's still those unclean clumps, and you have to basically sand that down, which could potentially weaken the welded areas if you try to do that. And then there's the final method where we basically heat gun the two parts together and try to mesh them that way. If we use that method, it's just going to look very ugly. Trust me, we tried it. It is not easy to do. Try to merge these two parts together that don't even have a connector. And that's what we want to do. We want to add a connector. So that's what we're doing. We're going to not cut it right away. We're going to add a connector just for the roof. So we add these connectors. So the connectors that we currently have are plug, dowel, snap, and then we have thread. So we're going to first use plug. I'm just going to go ahead and change the size of the plug so that it's much more visible, much more deeper as well, so that we make sure it's effective. So we're going to set it at 10, and then we're going to set the size at maybe 7. Yeah, we're going to set it at 7. And as you can see, right there, that is our plug. We're going to put it at this corner up here. And as the name suggests, it's basically a plug. What it does is it helps connect the object from one side to the other. It's removing material from the top side and then placing it down to the bottom side, as seen here. Then we have dowel. Now dowel is a little bit different. With dowel, it basically removes material from both sides and creates an independent object of itself. And that just basically gives you the opportunity to print that independent piece outside of the plate or onto a different plate if you want to. Now, we recommend printing it sideways so that the lay lines don't actually work against it when printing it out. Because, as it turns out, if you try to print it in sideways, it tends to have a better likelihood of just snapping off while trying to remove it or place it in. So that's why we recommend trying to put it, in between instead of that's why we recommend printing it from instead of the top, just to the sides. That way, it's not likely to break off. Even though it's still quick to put the. There we go. So yeah, here's dowel. Then we have the snap tool. And with snap, it's a lot more simpler. With snap, it just basically acts much like a dowel, much like a plug, where it creates, where it removes material from one side and leaves it onto the other. But in this case, it creates a gap in between and becomes a more permanent snap-on feature. Now, unfortunately, with something like snap, it has a lot of weaknesses. And because of how it works, potentially a snap-on connector can unironically snap off because of, depending on what type of material you're using. Let's say you're using PLA. PLA is not really known for strength, so it might not exactly be the best idea to use PLA for this particular connector. It would be much more better to use something like PETG or ABS just for a snap-on connector. Now you could try to thicken the snap itself so that it's less likely to break, something like this. But even then, we kind of don't recommend it as a connector, unless you're using something like PETG, which is more likely to, stick on, or unless you make the snap-on really big so it doesn't, snap off. And then finally we have thread. And thread is very unique because unlike plug, dowel, or snap, while it does create while it does remove material from one side and leaves it onto the other, it becomes a screw-on object instead of just a simple connector. However, it won't really work well for something like this type of build, so it would be best to be used in more as an independent piece and a more dedicated piece instead of trying to connect it via this way. But it is still a very good connector on its own. So I'm just going to go ahead and confirm the connectors. Maybe I'm just going to go and remove this and replace it with a plug because again, the thread doesn't really work well with the other connectors. So I'm just going to go ahead and confirm the connection. I'm going to go adjust the height again, make sure it's fine, and then I'm going to go ahead and perform the cut. And voila. We now have our roof separated from the rest of our roof. So go ahead and show you what the dowel looks like. This is the dowel itself, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead and change the angle so that it is on its flat surface. And so it becomes more sturdier in the print. But as you can see, our boat is still quite too big. So we're going to have to cut it down again. And this time, instead of going from the top, we're going to cut it right down the middle. Now, I could add connectors again. Use different connectors this time. Maybe I could actually use the thread But if I do that, what's going to happen, is that there's going to be like an overhang for this little object. Now it's not that far, but it's still pretty far from the rest of the object, and it doesn't have anywhere to support it. So I will have to create like support for the object if I try to purchase it. But because of that, there's also the potential risk that I might have little overhangs for this little hole. And if I have those little holes there, it can potentially ruin the connection process altogether, making it really difficult for me to connect these two pieces. So maybe using the connectors isn't really a good idea. So what can I use instead of the connectors? Now I could just use the same method I mentioned earlier, hot glue, super glue, heat gun, weld. But again, very ugly process. So what I'm going to do instead of using connectors or just cutting it right away, I'm going to use a unique little tool from the market. Instead of the planar cut, I'm going to use dovetail. And dovetail is very unique because it creates little puzzle pieces for us instead of acting as for us, and it basically becomes the connector piece of itself, as you can see right there. It's now a big wedge for me to connect from the top to bottom, and it basically allows me to connect it this way, as you can see. It's now one big puzzle piece, and using this, I can go ahead and perform the cut, and then I can just move the bottom piece right over here. I can then move the boat all the way over here. Just change the angle a little bit so that it is flat. And more. And voila. We now have 3 boat pieces that we can print all on the same A1 machine. But we don't need to stop right there. We can actually go a little further. So let's say we'll start with the roof first as our print. But then we move on to our next color, which is yellow, which is going to act as our second print. Then we can move on to the next, which will be our third print, and that's going to be red. Now we know which to start off with. We can start off with the orange, then we can move on to the yellow, and then we can move on to the red. Now if we have those colors, we're going to actually print them in those colors. But of course, if we try to slice them still and just print them using this method, it can still take a pretty long time because we're printing each piece individually, right? For this back piece, it's going to take us 6 hours. For the front piece, it's going to take us it's going to take us a while because it's taking a while to print this, to just generate this object. It's going to take us 7 hours, and if we print this one, it's going to take us about maybe. Let's just wait for the generation to finish. Wow, it's actually taking quite a while. Just a few more seconds. There we go. So, as you can see, it's going to take an overall 6, 5, and 7. 5, 6, 7. It's going to take that many hours overall just to print these objects. And that's going to take an entire day to do. But let's say we actually can just circumvent the time needed to print all of those things, right? Let's say we have 3 printers ready right off the bat. I can just load in the filaments I was planning on using for each of these pieces. I can load each of those colors onto the printers. And because I'm printing them all at the same time, I'm basically cutting down the time needed to print out this object. So at most, instead of an entire day, it's just going to take us 7 hours just to print all of these together. This one is the same. Yeah. So overall, it's just going to take us 7 hours max just to print all of the pieces at the same time using 3 different printers. So not only did we create a unique looking object with this, but we've cut down the, oh my god. Okay. Little oopsie there, but basically we've cut down the time needed to print out this object, and we ended up with a faster print and a very unique looking object, as seen with this big old benchy. And that will conclude the session for 3D slicing, the basics of 3D slicing. So, before we move on, I have a question for you all. What feature adds temporary structure to hold up overhangs? Yes, correct, support. You get from here on out, since we have plenty of time still, you guys can continue on with printing, or you can go ahead and practice with 3D modeling using Tinkercad, or again, you can go ahead and keep searching throughout the Maker Studio for any more prints that you want to try to print out. But yeah, this is basically the printing and modeler practice. However, if you're interested, we can also teach you a little bit about image to 3D, basically where we use AI to create like 3D model object right off the bat, using nothing more than an image. And the person that will be teaching you that is this chap. Do feel free to continue printing. You can also follow the steps if you wish. But yeah, I know. By the way, there is snacks over here if you would like some. Free snacks.
It is ideal for printers which only use one filament, like this printers here. We also have in the middle the reduced color, and the last one is the full color. So the difference between the two, or these two, both uses AMS, but the difference between them is the full color version is the more realistic image or model of your image. It depends if it depends on the number of colors in your model. So let's say you only have a full color AMS, so you can only use up to 4 colors. So, Abram, I have a question. Or we have a question. So if we're using the full color here in AMS, and let's say there are like 6 colors
Oh yeah.
in the AMS data.
You can only use like the 4 colors that's already included. Right now the AMS can't really mix colors yet, so it can only with whatever is loaded onto the it's just whatever 4 colors is. Basically, you can it won't be able to print. Yeah. You have to choose which colors you have to use. But there's a way to minimize colors and paint it yourself as well. So if you want to still continue, that it's still possible. Then it will be more, you'll see the lines more because the changes in the colors are more prominent. For example, if you want to do a like and make sure it's just 4 colors. Actually, you can get up to 8 colors if please, but you do need to have additional attachments, basically. So on AMS, like you can see your hub here, right? There's only 4 slots. That's because it can only actually have 4 colors here. But if you can upgrade that to another by having 8 slots there and 2 AMS. So you can have 2 of these, and then upgrade the hub slot, the filament hub to 8 slots. So a maximum of 8 colors. Yeah.
Okay, so again, we have the color option, single color, reduced color, and full color for your 3D model. And then once we're done, then we have 3 file options. So this is kind of connected to the color options that we discussed earlier. So if you chose the single color, it will be downloaded as an STL file. 3MF if you chose the reduced color version, and GLB file if you chose the color version. So since we're using a single color or a single print, we will be downloading your 3D model as an STL file. And after downloading, you will be redirected to this page. And since you already know how to use CoLab Studio, you can play with the settings to improve your quality, your strength, as well as add needed. And then I can just go ahead and click next page and then send your prints to your printer. And here are the things to note when choosing the right image. So in order to have the best 3D model, you should be following these points. So first, clear background, good lighting if possible. Full body should be visible. So let's you want all parts of the body. Let's say you're generating your portrait or your core body. You want all parts of your body to be visible. So in the picture, it should also be visible. And there should also be minimal or little to zero motion blur. So what do background remover apps like Canva. What you can also do is use another AI tool to clean your image or to process your image to make it more ideal or fit for preference. Like what we did before, we're printing a portrait or a full body picture of one of our employees, and what we did to clean that image is use Gemini AI to clean the background and even change the pose of that person. And here are the a little bit when using the image to 3D tool. So first, the model is floating. So what you can say, this is the model. If the model is floating, what you can do is support. So just click the model or the plate and then enable support and then click slice plate. The same solution is also done if your model has overhangs. So basically, if your model is floating or if it has overhangs, what you should do is enable support. And let's say your model has pose, you can just enable fixed model. So to do that, just right click on the object that you're going to fix. So right click on this and then click fix model. And automatically, CoLab Studio will repair your models. So depending on the complexity of your object, it might take too long or it can finish a bit faster. So it says here that the model or the coloring model has been repaired. So what it does is remove yung mga holes or existing holes within your object. And lastly, if the details are too messy, so since AI, it has a tendency to overcomplicate yung designs ng overcomplicate yung results ng designs mo. Like when yung image or AI generated images became a trend, isa sa mga pinaka-obvious isa sa mga way para ma-identify if AI generated ba yung image is to check if yung, let's say, merong human doon sa image na yun, is to check if yung number ba or yung count ba ng fingers na is right, is 5 ba. Kasi if 6 siya, it's automatically considered or flagged as AI generated. So parang same lang yung ginagawa niya doon. So, if ever na you think na yung details na generate ni AI is too messy, what you can do is either lower or babaan yung scale ng model, no? Or simplify yung model. So, to reduce the scale, some of you have already done this. So, what you can do is click on the object and then click on this button here, scale. And it's up to you if you want to reduce it kung ilan or kung gano'n nyo siya kababa i-reduce. So let's say 70%, you can just click on that or type 70 and then enter. And since naka-take yung uniform scale, ibig sabihin, automatically mag-a-adjust yung other dimensions ng object. So if I adjust yung x-axis to let's say 50 and hit enter, automatically na rin mag-a-adjust yung y and z dimensions ng 3D model. And another solution is to simplify yung model. So to do that, just right-click on the object and then click simplify model. So mag-a-appear naman itong window na to and you'll see yung triangle found dito sa baba. So right now, this benchy model has 3,462 triangles. And earlier, na-mention sa introduction to 3D printing yung concept ng polygons or ng triangles. And it says there na the higher the count of the triangles, the higher the resolution or the detail of the object. And in contrast, the lower the number of the triangles, the lower the resolution. So since yung problem natin dito is overcomplicated yung design na generate ni AI, what we're going decimate ratio. So for detail level, meron tayong 5 levels: extra high, high, medium, which is yung default, low, and then extra low. So for medium, bababaan natin siya to low. So right now, 6,518 ang triangles. And if bababaan natin siya, nagiging 4,000 na lang yung triangles. So same concept lang din naman dito sa decimate ratio, but ang difference lang is naka-percentage. So for this bench, let's try na babaan yung number of triangles. So let's say 97. Click. Lower that to about 540 triangles. So magiging ganito yung itsura ng model natin. So since na-reduce natin yung number of triangles. But of course, it's up to you kung ilang or kung gaano ka-simplify or kung
gaano ka yung triangles, mababa yung resolution ng model natin. But be careful with this kasi as you can see, 50% is already 286. Basically, if you apply it once, it's permanent. It's hard to bring it back to the original resolution that it already was in. So what you can do is just reload the file back in from the original file.
or just click on it.
Oh yeah, just click undo. That's also something.
So that's all there is to know about image to 3D. Also, I forgot to mention the credit part. So just like much like ChatGPT, it uses a token. So that's the same with image to 3D. So every time that you generate a model or an image, it uses up credits. So every month, nagre-replenish naman yung credits, so you receive 10 additional credits. But you also have the option to earn credits if 10 credits is not enough for you. So yeah, you can just click on printing or modeling. You can even try image to 3D using AI. Just note that depending on the complexity of your image, it might take a long while to generate your model.
Alright, does anybody else have any questions? So when it comes to the price, marami kaming computations na sir. Pero generally, it's up to you kung gaano mabilis na gusto mo lang magkaroon ng return of investment basically. So parang nililivide nila siya. Gano'n ka talaga ba habol, mabawi ka agad sa printer? Isa yun. And pero yung major na po talaga natin is yung filament price. Si filament kasi nasa range yan, 800 to 1,000 per kilogram. And pwede naman kasi natin yung price natin when it comes to grams. Oo, di ba? May grams naman siya. May time din. Doon, dinadagdag na din namin yun. We're doing it as a service. So, multiply na namin yung time tsaka yung grams. Kasi, the moment, kumbaga yung sa time, doon na namin binabase kung gano'ng tagal pa namin sa service. Hindi, hindi na namin siya gawin si printer. Kung gano'ng kabilis namin siya gawin. So, bakit na namin binabase yung calculation time. And then, nandun na din si kuryente, tsaka si labor, kasama na magkano binabayad natin sa mga natin per hour. Pero siyempre, i-divide pa natin per printer. Kung ilang printer ba hawak. Pero yeah, yun ang lang.
Pero ano ba, mga ganito? Mostly,
Kung usually, kapag kami, nakatingin kami ng gano'n. Let's say, ano lang to, less than 1 hour na lang to, after 30 minutes, gano'n. Usually, masa 100 na lang yata to, 200 plus. Pero mahal na yun. Pwede mo pang gumaan yun sa kasi in filament price, yan, yung 30 minutes na yan, I feel like it's just na yun, mga 20, 10 grams siguro. Hindi ko alam kung ilang grams yun, pero
20 grams yata.
mga 20 grams, di ba?
25 minutes.
Oo, sige, sabi. Yun eh. Yun lang siya, sampling na lang sa amin. Hindi natin sanded talaga. And may makikita kayo, may mga lines din. Sabay yun na. And if you want to lower these lines, gusto mong mapa-linis pa. Ano yung talaga gusto mong gawin is sa quality, di ba? Diba naka-point to pa? Kasi ang taas ng point to pa, pwede mong pang-iba yung point 0. Ang pinapag-dito siguro. And yun ang gusto mo. And extra. Point 0 yung height ng layers. So mas marami nga lang siyang layers. So ibig sabihin, mas matagal din siya. But the quality is going to be way better. Tapos pag kinumbine nyo siya sa point 2 na nozzle, sobrang ganda. Parang wala na rin yung layer lines. But again, it's going to multiply the time by us.
And consumption din.
Hindi din. Almost the same. Kasi mas manipis eh.
Ang manipis din
So, mas konti din yung mas manipis. So, almost the same. Yung time talaga yung mas manipis eh. When you lower the nozzle size and time. Doon sa apektuhan pa din yung mas possible kasi mas denser siya. Pero it's not as big as how long yun yung time talaga ng pinakamalaki. Yung grams is a bit small difference. Sige na po, sige. Anong nila naman?
Ayun. So, yun sa maintenance, no?
Ako na-discuss naman.
Kasi sinanapanong din ako na ginagamit nila yung mga water bottles. Tapos convert nila.
Yun.
Pero,
Ano na rin itong nakakita na ako ng interesting nga eh. Kasi ginagawa nila doon na binigyan na script.
We have available colors.
kailangan
Change color.
Paano nila na-compensate ito dahil? Ang masyadong manipis pa din yung script nila para magiging ganun ka-artist.
solid ko yun.
So, hindi naman halo yung content is a solid piece. Kaya, hindi like it's AI, yung nag-generate lang. Pero hindi ako sure. Possible naman kasi. And may gumagawa talaga. So, hindi pa rin ako sure. So, it's one of the things that gusto rin namin sa group. Ano kasi, may mga tapos tayo natin. Nakita niyo naman namin. Hindi namin pwede itapos. Parang littering. Tapos hindi ko din siya dapat yung use talaga.
Pero usable ba siya?
commercial mode, parang sila lang mode. Tunawin na lang namin kayo, diretso na sa doon, mag-engage natin siya. Pero meron pang isang way, which is gagawin mo ulit siya payment. Pero sabi nila, mas expensive pa kasi sa pagkakas na naman ang payment. Yung process, yung time, saka kuryente na natin yung makina pag-ulit. Tapos yung pa siya pulpo, pwede na pong magkamali kasi bawal magkalo yung ibang payment. Medji, pinagkalo yan. So the best way na talaga para sa application namin. Hindi pa namin ako. May question pa? And last one na. Go lang. Anong recommended natin? Ang ano natin? Prepare po ba kayo? Pag-negosyo natin. Hindi naman sure. Familiarize lang naman. Do you plan to make bigger brands talaga? Or are you okay with ito lang muna? Kasi if I were you talaga, kami kasi, kaya nakikita niyo ang dami namin puro natin sa kumuha na person. So, mas kaya siya. But another benefit by is it's almost half the price of the money. Almost half the price. So, parang pwede kang bumili ng dalawa ng ganito versus isang malaki. But mas ang kalalabasan kasi na, mas mabilis ka kapag may dalawa kang ganito. Mas marami kang mapapag. Kasi pares na mas speed to. CA1 walang difference with that comes to speed. And if malalaki naman yung mga prints mo, pwede ka kasi ano na lang, cut na lang, parts na lang. Na it's not really going to be sa lang in a way, makapagpapag yung mga item. Can also strengthen your print. Kasi hindi din naman lahat ng malalaking print matutunan din. Pwede ka rin kailangan mo rin sometimes mag-cut dito. So, ito na, for me, ito talaga best entry point. But let's say, yung mga, ang feature prints mo kasi talaga is kakain talaga na mga images. Kailangan mo talaga matitibay. Kailangan mo school, kailangan mo function. Tapos, yung kailangan ko let's say na, yung market, better na talaga ang mag-invest ka na mas enclosure. Kasi yun yung mag-filter na. Pwede ka na mag-print kahit yung mga images. Hindi mo na kailangan na i-enclose pa to. Kasi yung mga pinili mo, kailangan mo pala na i-place na gagawin ko pa na enclose. Na pwede naman DIY lang, pero pwede. So I would say ito pa rin talaga. If you really want to start, ito na mo. Yung nare-research ko, parang mas recommended ako. Titignan mo kasi ilan kung ganito. Marami ka na rin magpahalig siya. Hanggang saan lang, ganito. Kasi naman din naman pag mag-ano, mag-negosyo ka din. Sakto na rin yung mga ganitong dito. So yun, I would suggest ito na lang. Tapos mas maraming ganito kaysa sa isang malaki. Kasi yung isa, dalawa na nito. Diba ha? Yun yan